So thanks so much again, Mr. Aaron Dries from across the pond, coming to join us again at almost 2 in the frickin' morning. Um, Super appreciate this, man.
No dramas at all. My neighborhood is quiet and eerie. Let's put it that way at this time of the night. So I'm the weirdo.
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. Well, as eerie as your neighborhood might be, I'm sure it doesn't compare to the man of the midnight hour here, wee hours, drinking his tea, and all kinds of diabolical things going around in your head, no doubt. So take
Always.
that, neighborhood.
Take that. Take that.
Yes. Perfect. So no, I really appreciate this, man. As always. Um and I know the last book that you sent over to me, Cuts to Care, or Cut to Care, was something I tell you, man, ever since you mentioned it, I was really looking forward to diving into it because I got the impression that it really gave a more intimate glimpse than even some of your other books that are hard hitting as all hell. But I found this one, from your description, had a really personal attachment to you. Certainly ties into a lot of your experiences, both personally and professionally, as a as a youth addiction counselor and all that that entails. But man, I had no idea as I dove into this thing story by story, brick by brick. It really screamed Aaron Dries. When How long did it take you to write these? I mean, was this sort of the culmination of, that midnight hour after work, and this is you pouring your blood out on the pages, or was it something that you constantly sat down to write specifically for collection purposes, or how did that come about as far as the birth of the stories and culmination of the collection?
Yeah, that's a great question. The collection is a combination of older stuff and newer stuff, and I've got a bunch of short stories that I've published over the last 10 years or so, and there were a couple there that all fit within a certain particular type of a theme, and I was picking up on what that was, and I had written a story which is the lead story in the collection called Damage Inc. or Damage
Oh,
Incorporated. And when I wrote that particular story, I knew that all of a sudden I had the beginnings of a collection, and that there were these unifying threads with a couple of my already published stories that were floating around there that already slot into this universe really, really easily. And I don't know how to describe it other than when I had Damage Incorporated completed, and I read it, it was like the most feral writing experience I've ever had. I can't describe it in any other way other than that particular story purged out of me quicker and more violently than anything I've ever written has. And when it landed on the page, I looked at it and it was like somebody else had written it. I have no idea where it came from. And then as soon as I saw it and I read it, I realized that I was basically writing to myself, Aaron, you might need to seriously do a bit of hardcore thinking about what's going on in your life,
yeah.
and maybe make some serious decision about your well-being. I can hear your little gremlin.
Yes, yes. They're just outside carving pumpkins, so they have come up. So you might hear a little bit of personal gremlin chaos. My otherwise known as my morning alarm clock.
And once
Yeah.
I saw it there, I thought I'm going to write another story that's coming from a similar place, and it just spilled out of me extremely quickly and really violently. And all of a sudden, I had a collection, enough stories there for a collection. And these were things that I was writing when I was getting home from work. These are things that I was writing when I was getting home before going to work, and it was becoming part of my self-care routine. So I was working specifically during the pandemic with obviously younger people with alcohol and other drugs, homelessness, and specifically women and children surviving family and domestic violence, and all within a homelessness context. And I was starting to struggle, and when I realized what I was actually working on, I found it somewhat therapeutic. So the stories were, I called it a collection of little hurts, and I guess it was really for me a collection of little wake-up calls. Thankfully, I actually did listen to myself, and I've made some changes professionally There may be more to come because vicarious trauma is a real thing, and so the stories in this collection are hard hitting,
Oh yes.
and they're really really personal. But they had to get out of me because those head gremlins were in my head. It's like a snake that crawls into bed with you. And you know how you hear about the idea of snakes sizing up the prey, like they stretch themselves out to look like something that they're going to eat.
Right.
It's like I could feel this snake in my bed sizing me up, and I could roll over and I could feel its scales against me. And I thought, I need to get this thing out of my life, and I wrote it away. So I'm feeling a lot better. And there is a book that's emerged from the back of, from the as a result of all this. It seems a little bit on the nose to say it, but it probably was a little bit of therapy on the page.
Yeah, and I really got that impression. And it's interesting that you're writing, or that you mentioned about the snake analogy as well, because of course, one of your stories that you do have in here called Eels is very much like that as well, and about the character waking up with these terrible things, and very much like most of the stories that you write in there, is that there's definitely a fine line between fantasy and realism, but at the same time, when that fantasy is interacting with your life to such a degree, I mean, it, like they say, reality is perspective, and I mean, it very much is the reality of these characters. And I love the fact that you write some notes at the end of it, of the end of the book, kind of give an idea of what inspired these stories, and you could tell that a lot of the fantastical stuff that occurred in there, where very much came from your own personal experiences. I mean, I think the worst, or one of the worst ones that I read about, the most poignant one, and I forgive me now, I can't remember which story this tied into. Um, Love Amongst the Redback Spiders, perhaps, but it was one where you actually saw some poor sap. You were driving around with your mate, and stopped. I think you said you stopped at a red light or something and saw some poor guy just get bludgeoned to death with a beer bottle, or
Yeah.
hopefully not to death, but
Well, I still think about that. This was years ago. So I was with a bunch of mates, and we were out drinking on Oxford Street, which is a really kind of popular kind of party spot in Sydney, New
okay.
South Wales. And Oxford Street is like where all the gay clubs are, and so we were all young and out and dancing and things like that. And we were in our early 20s, in the big city, thinking that wow, we've really made it. And it was the middle of the night. It would have been like 3. It would have been around about this time, right? And we're all had a few drinks under our belts, and we're walking along Oxford Street, feeling like the world can't touch us. The folly of youth, I guess. And we were walking up towards Taylor Square, which is where there's a bunch of bars on the different corners, and a car pulled up just about maybe like 10 meters ahead of us, and a bunch of guys jumped out of the vehicle, ran to the open bar, and had broken beer bottles, and they stabbed the guy right in front of us. They obviously just wanted to hurt someone. This was not something that was obviously premeditated. It was people who needed a kick, and they wanted to kick a queer. And I'm glad that we left that last bar 20 seconds later than maybe we possibly had anticipated, because that could have been us. And I still think about that guy, and it shook me very, very terribly. And I think that Love Amongst the Redback Spiders, which is specifically a story set not at that time, but looking back in regards to the people who came before us, the shoulders upon which younger people stand, who go through serious adversity, and telling their story as a way for us to remind ourselves that not only do we need to remember who came before us, but we also need to remind ourselves that prejudice still exists, and that if we think that homophobia doesn't exist anymore, we're living in some sort of insane utopia.
Geez, I didn't realize. So you'd been in that same bar about 20 minutes before that poor guy was. Jesus.
And we watched it happen. It was right there. So there were a lot of there were all of the stories in the collection are based around a similar theme, which is about the cost of caring, and about what it means to care for someone. When you care for someone, but you do it maybe for the right reasons. Sometimes we care for people for the wrong reasons, and for
Right.
all of these tales to be on a spin along that theme, but not just telling stories set in the present, but looking at those themes through the prism of like the turn of the century and what caring looked like at in the late 1800s, and looking at the exact same thing, looking at what it would look like in the future there. So I wanted to do the spectrum, but I particularly wanted to tell a story that was about the gay experience in the 1950s, because the whole idea of ice pick lobotomies, backyard ice pick lobotomies, is true and is historical. It's something that particularly men were doing once they were often outed in the 1950s and early 1960s. And it made me angry to read about. It made me incredibly angry to read about. And
Yeah, I
so
had no idea.
yeah, it's one of those really, really disturbing kind of things that we tend to kind of glaze over in terms of our history. So when I wanted to write a story that kind of honored what came before, because we live in much, much better times, but it's still not great. There's still a lot of people who hate very, very deeply. And
Yeah.
for them, hate is something they care about and nurture. Caring can be something that we use against others. Caring can be a form of self-hurt, and caring sometimes can be something that's utterly needed. But in order to obtain it, you have to sacrifice something along the way. And this, for me, that theme was fertile ground to explore within the horror genre. Because yes, are these stories really personal and in some ways autobiographical? Yes, but I wanted to rattle the reader like I've never rattled anyone before. And
Mission
so
accomplished.
I wanted to literally grab a reader by the throat and say, you need to
Yeah.
take a serious hard look at yourself and ask some serious questions. Because if you don't, you're done. You're done. So it was a really intense experience, and it was something that I was working on during the pandemic. And I made the shift from working on long fiction. I've been working writing novels for so long, and I've been working on a novel for quite a while now, and it's so close to being done, but I just haven't been able to work on it during the pandemic because there was no downtime for me during the
Right.
pandemic. I was at work every day, and working frontline and caring for people and making sure and helping them to figure out ways to care for themselves. It doesn't matter that there's a pandemic and that the world is locking down. Domestic and family abuse ramped up, homelessness ramped up,
Yeah.
mental health exacerbation ramped up massively, alcohol and other drugs ramped up. And then you look at the intersection between that and minorities. All of this type of stuff was exploding all around me, and it was the snake, the vicarious trauma snake that I keep alluding to. It was getting bigger and bigger, and it was looking Aaron shaped. And I knew this thing was going to eat me alive. And if you don't address it, it consumes you. And it's a really, really distressing thing. So I'm hoping that this collection connects with people, because who isn't feeling burnt out right now?
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully, people relate to.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I mean, you touched on so many amazing things, throughout your description of the book and what it meant to you and what you mean to the book. And I mean, I couldn't help but think too that if this thing doesn't win a Stoker for that, because I would be very surprised, honestly, because I think you nailed it on the head that it's not just a poignant book. It's not just the kind of book that'll keep you up at night, that'll really make you think. But I think it's just important. Just a
Oh,
lot of important topics that you cover in here. And I mean,
that's so nice of you to say. Honestly, that means the world to me. I've also it's something that all writers go through, all creatives go through it. It doesn't
yeah,
matter what, you need to have those moments of self doubt, and to know that you like it and that you see the value in it
yeah.
matters a lot. It matters a lot to me.
I think it's going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people that are reading this. And you touched on some things regarding the burnout certainly for the pandemic. I work in a uh, long-term care center as well. I'm certainly not on as much of a heroic portion of it as you are. I'm a housekeeper. Um, but I
No,
certainly do work. Yeah, and I keep pretty close ties to the people I work with in our memory care section as well. And I mean, it's no secret that we're losing a lot of residents right now because of the stress of all of it and the isolation.
yeah,
And I want to ask you about that, Aaron, because it's very interesting. I know certainly here we have with their emergency lines as well. I mean, they're busier than ever before, and it's obviously taking a huge toll on the healthcare system as well. I mean, I was reading an article that we're having to now get people from the next town over to bring their ambulance in because there's just not enough. Uh, I'm hearing all the time in my work that it's almost next level impossible to hire people, especially caregivers, nurses, PSWs, because nobody wants to enter this environment. And the ones that did, they're just burned out.
yeah.
I wonder if there's a flip side to this because I get the impression as well that, and I want to talk to you about this in more detail, but I think it'd be very easy to read your collection and come away thinking, well, apparently caring too much is not good, and we should make sure that we're not carrying too much at all costs. At the same time, I have to wonder that I think a lot of the burnout that's happening with a lot of folks that went into the pandemic with a lot of addiction issues, a lot of mental health issues. I wonder if all of a sudden a lot of those things came to the surface because now they're told, at least at the beginning, they were told to stay home, they were told to social distance each other. And I think as a result of that, all of a sudden these masks that they had to wear around society to fit in, and we all know the danger of masking. I hate that. I've got kids on the spectrum as well, and I've seen the damage, and friends as well. I see the damage that masking can have on them. All of a sudden these masks are put aside because there's nobody else around but themselves. Do you think that maybe contributed to that extra overboiling point of all these people coming out and all of a sudden making guys like yourselves on the front line busier? And do you think that there's any positivity that came across that where people had to face the true
do.
selves?
I definitely do think that. I think also that the pandemic raised awareness about what's been going on for a long time for a lot of people, and it's made having the conversation for people to actually be able to ask for help a lot easier. It has brought conversations around health and well-being into every family's home across the world. And these were things that were silently kind of people kind of shuffled aside. And in some ways ghettoed people into environments where they could only ever function wearing a mask,
Yeah.
and like the mask of I'm okay, I'm so okay that my cheeks hurt from smiling so much when inside I've got terrible things going on. So if there are things that are positive about what we've all been through as a planet recently, I think it's absolutely that we've given ourselves the permission to say that we're not okay, and I think that only good things can come from that. It's funny what you're saying with that as well, and I guess what I've also been saying too in terms of the ethos behind the collection. I weirdly feel like there's optimism in this collection compared to other stuff that I've written. There are a couple of happy endings, sort of. The final story in the collection is called Shadow Debt, and it's a story.
Oh, love that story.
Thank you, and
Jeez.
look, you working in your line of work, that's kind of your universe. It's a story that's set primarily in a nursing home.
Yeah, and you nailed dementia specifically so bloody well and so eloquently, and it's such a sneaky thing, and it's very insidious. It really sneaks in.
Yeah.
It's the snake that kind of sidles up to you that you just don't know it's there.
Yeah, and all the characters in that particular story are all people who probably historically have worn those masks, and or have reached a point in their life where they realize I need to actually take this off and to say that I'm struggling, that being a caregiver is something that's really difficult right now, and I need you to come to the party with me, and I need us to be hurting together because hurting in isolation the way we are is tearing our family apart. Because we're all grieving the loss of something, and as you know, when it comes to dementia, this particular story, it, I, dementia is many losses stacked back to back. There's
Right.
the diagnosis, there's the side effects of medication, There's the condition itself and the way it erodes the brain, and so you lose your loved one again and again and again, and each
Yeah.
time you come back, there's a little bit less, and it's many, many, many deaths, and it's incredibly difficult to do in isolation, and
Oh yeah.
so I really wanted to make sure that with that particular story, that the women in the center of it, because it's a story primarily about women, generations of women, 3 generations
Right.
within the same family, basically saying we're stronger together if we admit that we're hurt and that we're hurting bad and that we're really, really sad that dementia is taking a toll on our family. And this particular story, for those who haven't read it, is about a woman in her 70s whose husband is in a memory care unit. He has Alzheimer's. He's not doing well. And on the way home from the nursing home on a stormy day, this woman pulls over and actually saves a young child's life, a young teenager's life. She was on a cliff ready to suicide, and she actually kind of brought her in, coaxed her back, and saved this girl's life. And then the girl ran. In the wake of that, it's almost like death is coming back in the weight of that suicide, and it's taking little bits and pieces from this woman's life.
Yeah, and that's
And it's all
yeah, it was
on as dementia metaphor, so to speak. So
yeah, and it's the way that you did that in there as well. It's so subtle, and it's again, I mean, it hit me so hard as well because again, that's what my first foray into my current company. I worked for the first year on their only lockdown residential section. So it was folks that had advanced dementia, but that were also exit seeking as well. So a lot of times they could be quite vocal about the things that are bothering them. They don't even realize that are bothering them. And then seeing sort of seeing the progression of that, especially as some of them, quite a few more of them have been passing away over the past several months, certainly with the pandemic and the constant being shoved back into isolation. And it's very much is. It's like you said. It's a lot of little deaths that happen quite consecutively that a lot of times they're not even aware of. And it's not too often where you get somebody where they have the type of dimension that it's almost a blissful thing for them. I think we've got one resident who's like that, where she'll look out her window and she just sees this beautiful landscape of this gorgeous garden, all these wonderful things happening, all these birds that don't exist, at least in Canada, that come into her window. And I'm thinking, if I, God forbid, if I ever, develop dementia, that's the one I want to have, but that's such a rarity. And I'm sure there's a lot of confusion that goes into all that, even, in that resident's quiet moments.
Absolutely. And it's so painful for those who survive.
Very much.
That's where the real agony is. And I wanted to write I wanted to write about reluctant caregivers. No one asks for that on their family, but
right.
I wanted to write in Shadow Dead about people who step up to the plate and say, we didn't ask for this, but your grandfather, your father, my husband, he is a good man and we're going to stand by him even though it hurts us. But we have to do this together. And meanwhile, this debt that she's going to have to repay because of somebody that she saved manifests in the stripping away of tiny little things in her home, opening up the pages of a favorite book and the pages are all blank, looking at photographs on the wall and all of a sudden the photographs of her and her husband aren't there. I'm missing
that hurts.
All of these little things, a record that she associates with her husband that's playing, and then all of a sudden all the grooves are gone, and so the needle's just kind of just wiggling all over the place. It makes it sound like a theremin. Like it's these sudden little evaporations, which is what the dementia process kind of is like in terms of the way it erodes away, I imagine, the human brain. And the things that are taken away, a little bit of hurt is replaced in those who live on. And I wanted to kind of honor that. So even though these stories are sad and depressing in many, many ways and really, really scary, I hope that we're honoring people by their hurt. And I think to some degree we remember and mourn people as a way to honor people.
For
and
sure.
that's a natural human thing. And I don't think we're exploring that enough in fiction, which is why I wanted this particular book to be about these type of feelings. And you know, the decisions, like I knew that this type of stuff was different from me. Like I've tapped into some of these kind of themes in my fiction in the past,
Yeah.
certainly on some stuff that I'm working on currently, but I knew that this was like a bit of a shift for me. It's a bit more of a serious book. It's a definite step away from a lot of the splattery type of stuff that I've done in the past. I wanted to let people know to expect a different book from me. I think the cover does that. I wanted to
Hmm.
do something that was far more indebted to Murakami and those type of covers, as opposed to necessarily the splattery type of stuff that I've done in the past, or the distinct, you know, kind of coming of age body horror kind of cover of Dirty Heads, for example.
Right.
Um, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I wanted to let people know through the design of the book itself physically, to expect something different from me, and I hope that it doesn't scare people away.
I don't think so. No.
I think there's some funny stories in here as well. Like I think there's a story in here called "Cut to Care," which is the
Yeah.
title story, which is like a 3-page kind of splatterpunk parable, for lack of a better word, about somebody who's like, it's the old expression I'm going to give. I give so much, I would give somebody this shirt off my back, except it's taken to the 100th extreme, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a story in here called "Nonna Doesn't Dance," which is set in the nursing home of the future,
Yeah.
um, in which we assuage our guilt for dumping people in nursing homes in Western cultures by allowing ourselves to watch kind of school style end of year recitals with the elderly, people who live in these nursing homes, dancing the way they used to in their youth with the assistance of machines. And the outcome of that particular story, I
It's
find,
just creepy.
it's creepy and it's disgusting, but I think it's also very funny.
Yeah.
Because it's so fundamentally absurd. But caring is absurd, and the guilt is often absurd as well. And the the fakeness sometimes of caring, is inherently absurd too. So I wanted to tap into some of those elements as well.
Yeah.
I find some of this stuff a little bit funny.
Well, you know, and you really do have to laugh at it to a degree. I mean, I remember one resident that you know that we have in where I am. Um, just an amazing person. Unfortunately, her hubby had strokes and was more in quite a vegetative state, so much as dementia, and you know just not vocal, not responsive at all. And this woman was like, she deserved to have a cape. She was there almost every single day, uh, weather permitted, was constantly, you know, he was bound to a wheelchair, walking around. She had 2 kids. She was super busy, kept the family going, and was clearly that was her absolute entire life.
Yeah,
But it was just incredible too, because at the same time it was just business as usual. You know, just
yeah,
talking everything very matter of fact, almost to the point where I think she maybe, I don't know if I'd say that she elevated herself above it a little bit. I think she was very, very aware of the situation and what she had in the memory of what used to be, because I think for her this was about a 7 or 8 year journey at this point, where the husband that she knew just was no
yeah.
longer there anymore. All that was left was that mask.
It's an invisible cannibal, you know, that
Yeah.
you know, it's like a little invisible Pac-Man that's
Yeah.
coming for the person that you love the most. And the person that you're describing, this real world person,
Oh yeah.
is essentially the main character of Shadow Dead. And I really wanted to write a story about that person, because uh, that person's a goddamn rock star, you know,
Oh
and
yeah.
they, you say that, you know, they would be the last person to say, "Don't come near me with that cape. I'm not a hero here. I'm not that
Yeah.
type of person. Don't glorify me here. I'm here because I I love my loved one, and
Yeah.
that's all there is. You know, that's if I'm a good person, it's because I'm still here, but nothing more. But really, deep
Yeah.
down, they are heroic, and I wanted to write about reluctant heroism in Shadow Debt. and go and to make it the story of somebody who's in their 70s. Because frankly, as well, when we're looking at the horror genre, not specifically but broader in all of literary kind of fiction, the elderly are invisible again. They're either
Right.
cute pandas, that we kind of roll around, or we villainize them in ugly ways by making them seem scary. And look, I like this stuff as much as the next person, but I didn't want to do that either. I wanted to, I think one of the best stories about aging out there is Joe Lansdale's Bubba Hotep. I think that is a story that I was really thinking of when I was writing Shadow Death. The two could not be any more different in terms of their tone and execution. But they are unified in that they're about giving sight and a heroic narrative to a part of our population that the rest of us isn't comfortable looking in the eye at and saying that they're still here, because we fundamentally have anxieties about admitting to ourselves that will be us one day. And so I want to write a story about that person. And that's why Shadow Death, which is the final novella in the collection, is to me my favorite, in the entire collection. This may have started with Damage Incorporated, which is about social workers who go into the home of grieving families and act out dead loved ones to give the families the opportunity to say goodbye, and about the worker who does this too well and the family may let her leave. It may have started with this, but I knew that when I wrote the last story in the collection, and it was the last story, and it was Shadow Death, I knew that I was like, I started this and started my own kind of healing process so that I could write that story. And I knew that the collection was done.
Yeah. Have you, regarding that story in particular as well, Aaron, I couldn't help but think as well that maybe it's a part of it is because it's one of the longer stories in the collection as well, which was fantastic. It was one of the ones that it ended, and I'm like, if this one had a little bit more pages, I wouldn't be upset with that, because I didn't want to leave these people behind. And I thought, if there's one story out of here, maybe Telemaker was incredible as well. Just the visualization was awesome. But I found that that one, Shadow Death, I thought would have made just a fantastic standalone little chapbook as well, specifically so that people, maybe even like me, who might, work in an LTC, can say, here you go. You're not the only one. You need to read this. I think it's going to be a big wake up and a bit of a shake of the heart and the mind for you to look at things a little bit differently.
That's a really beautiful idea, actually, and I hadn't thought of that. It's definitely one of those stories that kind of grew and grew and grew, and I knew that it had the potential to continue growing. I don't know. I may come back to it one day, because here's the thing: is that for me, just because I wrote something and complete it doesn't mean it's dead to me. This stuff, I will take any opportunity to kind of go back and to re-explore something, to take it apart and see if there's still life in there that I haven't thought, but it depends on what type of a format that is. Is it taking a short story and expanding it into a novel or a larger novella? Is it adapting it for film? Is it looking at it, maybe thinking of it in terms of a graphic novel? There's all of these different types of things which I'm playing around with as well when it comes to cuts, because people keep telling me when they're reading this stuff, they're like, this particular story resonates with me and we would love to see it kind of adapted into something else. And that's already happening with this collection, which is really exciting. But I guess that means it's connecting with people, which is that kind of fear and anxiety that I keep having, that maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe this collection will have its legs, and be able to walk. But I would love to. Shadow Dead in particular, I don't know. Maybe I'm not done with that story, and maybe I'm not done with those characters yet either. I don't know, because I love those characters. I love the dynamic between this mother and her daughter and her granddaughter, and the men in their lives, and how they are all haunted by something that they can't see, that is trying to strip away their identities. I find that really and it also takes a dark turn. Do they come together to defeat a common evil? Sort of, but there is our main character, when she realizes, like, is there a way to reverse this? what's happening, what she comes to is a really disturbing conclusion. And that's the horror element there, which is like, would you do a really, really terrible thing to bring back the person that you love, even if it was only just postponing the inevitable? So there was that element to it as well, which I would love to expand on in something else down the track. Who knows?
Yeah,
Who
that might
knows?
that might be my favorite element to it as well. That through the girl that she saved, she ultimately, and some other aspects, of course. I don't want to give too much of it away. That I love the fact that this, we'll just call it the situation. So I love the fact that the situation for this older, beautiful, regular old lady next door kind of thing, that the situation puts a spotlight and forces this woman to identify a sort of, I don't know if I'd call it evil, but certainly a dark desperation within her, a capability for evil that she had no idea that she was capable of. And it forced her to basically be at this crossroad where, like you said, she can choose to go in this direction and maybe preserve something, even though the inevitable is still always going to be the end result for her. But because of her goodness, it really is that struggle for her where it's like, well, sure, this will put me in a better position, but this is the damage that, is that something I'm capable of? That's something I want to be capable of. And I love the fact that it really puts her on the precipice of, what does she do? Is she going to jump along with this other girl, or?
Yeah, it's for me, when I was writing that story and I got to that point in it, I'm like, oh well, this story has evolved
Yeah.
into Richard Matheson's The Box. Here's the box that arrives on your doorstep. Push it,
Yeah.
and you'll get $1 million. But somebody who you don't know will die. Would you push the button? And that's really that's really in that story, in Shadow Debt, that is the kind of moral dilemma that she's faced here. She's like, would you do something really, really terrible to save somebody just for a day, basically? And what type of caring is that, and who are you really caring for? And sometimes the way we care for ourselves can be an ugly thing. So just because I wanted to explore,
Yeah.
Look, I'm not interested in stories that are about good versus evil. I'm really not. I'm interested in stories in which people are in the pursuit of goodness, and for some people that may mean goodness is to do something terrible or to do something really, really beneficial. And then I'm interested in the way that the people who are trying to do good are layered with anxiety and in some cases evil, and people who do terrible things have the potential for good. I'm only interested in moral ambiguity when it comes to fiction in my own stuff, and not in the binary good versus evil sense. And that particular story is probably the one that nails that moral complexity down strongest. There are certainly others throughout, but that one may be strongest. Is the one that kind of really drives that theme home, because I'm kind of bored by good versus evil stories. I know that that's kind of what we do, but I think that as we continue to I just think we can look deeper.
I think so
And
too. And I think that a lot of what I find fascinating is that you can certainly have, if you say good versus evil in a sense, you you can certainly have folks that are evil that have some goodness to them, but it makes more interesting questions because you can certainly have evil folks that have some goodness in them, but then you can also have some fantastic people that might have a little bit of evil in them that is cause for caution.
yeah,
Uh,
and who sometimes just we also mess up along the way of trying to do good things.
sure.
And there are things where like, oh, I really should have addressed this sooner, and I didn't because I was nervous to do so. There's a story in the collection called The Acknowledged, which is about a guy who is on a bushwalk and essentially saves another dude's life. He was like, he had fallen, broken his legs,
Yeah.
and would have been left in the bush to die. Saves this guy's life and becomes kind of a little bit of a small town hero for a little bit. Gets his 15 minutes, and the guy that he saved keeps on wanting to say thank you again and again. And this actually ends up becoming a nightmarish thing because there's no way he can ever show his gratitude enough. And so
Yeah.
what starts off as a present ends up being a visit in the night, breaking in to make food, overstepping all of these boundaries. And our main
Yeah.
character, who we know has done a great thing, saying to himself, I should have put a pin in this long ago. And I didn't because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But
I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that are kind of maybe seeing themselves as both faces or both sides of that mask, where they've got, you know, the one that they think they should be showing everybody, and the one that they see when their eyes are closed. You mentioned a little bit ago, Aaron, that through all the writing that it caused you to make some pretty major changes as well, professionally, perhaps personally as well, and I think you alluded to certainly with your own writing. Would you mind unpacking that a little bit and maybe talking about some of those things? Because I love talking to people like you that really push through those crossroad moments. And I'm guessing the fact that you talked about it so
yeah,
positively, that that was a positive thing for you, and that you were able to overcome a few maybe demons or a few of those
totally.
darker sides of the mess.
Yeah. So let's look at a story like Damage Inc., in which is the story of one of these social workers going to these people's homes, and but she knows that she's almost not fit to do her job because her burnout is so severe that she knows that she can't. She's not protecting herself, and if she can't protect herself, then how is she going to help others? It's that old cliche about we're on takeoff and the plane is starting to shake and the masks are going to drop down from the roof on the plane. Make sure you put the mask on you so you can breathe before you put it on your kids, because if you
Yeah,
go pass out, then your child will suffer. And so that whole idea was very, very strong in that character's mind, and that almost identity blurring between work should be at work and my personal life should be in my personal life. The crossover in
yeah, it
an
should be.
almost dangerous kind of way, all of that was absolutely stuff that I was experiencing. And so I was having a lot of anxiety about work. I was having panic attacks. I was thinking the compartmentalization between my personal life and my professional life. The lids on those boxes were loose, and all of the little gremlins were crossing over back and forth. That's not an uncommon thing for people working frontline to feel. There are a
100%.
number of you would kind of even feel it too. You know, these are we safeguard ourselves when we put ourselves out there on the firing line, because if no one else is going to protect us, these industries are so starved for people who actually care, but the systems aren't built to support every element of the risk. And so there's things that we have to do to keep ourselves safe. And I read that story and I realized I need to make some changes. So I had a shift in roles. I moved away from working frontline and looking at, instead of going into people's homes, maybe supporting the teams who do that, stepping away and helping people in that respect. I took some leave. I engaged with support to help me as well, which is something that we all need to do. And my creative outlet, which has always been my writing, was something that I did a little bit more meaningfully in an attempt to spread out all of these toxins. And as a result of doing those things, I felt that those compartmentalizations kind of pulled back into line. It was like putting myself through mental gym so that I could feel fit enough to go into it and go, yeah, I'm ready now. And the reason that all of that blurring was starting to happen is because I was tired. And so I needed to have some serious rest. And I'm still working through that period of rest by alternating how much I can work and at what different times. I'm still working my 40 hours a week and writing, but I'm taking opportunities to do things that aren't in the front line. And that is helping me just to bring balance back to my life. And that is enabling me to go to work and not feel anxiety anymore. And it's also enabling me to come back home and not feel like the snake is in my bed anymore. So,
Good.
and
Good for you.
I genuinely think that writing this collection has been part of me being able to do that. And I think it's been a really big part of this. So I'm feeling a lot better, I guess is what I'm saying, basically.
Good. No, that's amazing. I'm really happy to hear that too, because it's so important on both sides. And I know this is going to come across totally selfish. That I obviously the better, more balanced that you are, you're going to be more capable of doing that kind of care and helping to support the people that you go to work to help support.
Totally.
And it's great as well because it helps to keep, those incredible stories going along so that, people like me and everybody else watching this as well can have that to enjoy, to look forward to, and also to connect to it, and hopefully get those questions, if not answered, at least start asking those questions about themselves and the people around them, and hopefully
Yeah.
start to go towards that light that you offer through the darkness that you discuss in the books.
Yeah, look, discussions, and this is this kind of loops back to what we were talking about before about how the pandemic has changed us. Is that having conversations like this about struggles when it comes to mental health stability? Like I'm lucky and extraordinarily privileged that
Yeah.
I have the self awareness to know when things aren't right. That emotional regulation is not something that everyone has. And I've got the qualifications and the experience to be able to see the red flags and to try to make sure that I combat them in a way that's safe for me and for other people. Not everyone has that. So I think that the fact that we're having this conversation now and talking about it so openly, I don't know if we would have been happening, and I don't know if people would have been wanting to listen to us talk about it quite so much before the pandemic. I think that has changed. I love what the Horror Writers Association is doing currently in regards to having committees in regards to responsiveness when it comes to mental health awareness in regards to their programs. I think that that's really, really important that we're seeing that even in the our genre. I think that these are important things for us to be talking about in a non-demonized type of way. And look, here's the thing: when it comes to like the depiction of mental health and horror is something that's always been a contentious thing. That sometimes, but I don't think we can't. I'm not saying that we can't write stories about our own fears and anxieties and the ugliness of mental health. I'm just saying that I think the conversations we're having about them are a little bit more. They're not falling on the deaf ears that they once were, and I think
Right.
it's not a victim narrative either necessarily. It's really about strength and resiliency, and I think that that's a shift that's newish, especially within say the writing field and our writing field specifically.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting to consider that, because I know certainly, and what was it? I try to remember. I read a quote somebody had mentioned on their social media that I thought was, at first I'm like, I don't really thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. Where they were stating that one of the beautiful things about the horror genre and the folks that play within it, about how oftentimes they're the most kindest, down to earth, giving people that you'll ever come across, because obviously it's, you can't just put a full blanket statement on it, but predominantly the horror genre is made up of a lot of folks that are to some degree broken. And
Mm,
it's through the horror genre and through exploring those terrors. And of course, that's the beautiful thing about horror, is that it really does explore those terrors, the anxieties of monsters. They're both very real and very, very subliminal. And it was, and I thought that, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that regarding the folks within the horror community being somewhat broken. So it is fantastic that HWA is, providing just more awareness, more honesty, and some more resources for folks to be able to pick up on.
totally. Look, I think that the horror genre, we're all outsiders. I
Yeah,
think that we were all the ones growing up who felt like we didn't necessarily belong. And at the time when we're younger and we're having those feelings, they can be incredibly toxic and demand a lot of you and absorb up a lot of your energy and consume you and be incredibly destructive. But for those of us who get through it, I think it helps to arm us with a particular type of empathy in which we can look at ourselves and those around us with a really, really non-condescending but empathetic eye, not a sympathetic eye,
right.
empathetic. It's a very, very different thing.
Very, yeah,
And I think that that is something we see more than anywhere else in the horror arena. We're outsiders talking to people who have felt like outsiders. That's where a lot of our readers are as well. Our universes within the horror genre are violent, grotesque, scary, splattery places
Yeah,
in which every anxiety is explored and exploited. But it's a safe space. I genuinely feel like it's a safe space.
I agree.
And I think that, are we all kind of floundering naked? Yeah, but there's not a lot of judgment. And I think that's really, really beautiful. And that's why, for me, community within the genre, as a writer, finding your people is so important, because it's nice to know that you're not showing off your little hurts and your scars to no one. And it is also nice to know that people do have your back as well throughout that process. So I was on a panel recently where they were like, what advice do you give to new writers? And there were a lot of people who were like, oh, you should be working this many pages a day, things like that. And I thought,
Yeah.
you need to find your people. You need to find your community, because not only is it great to have people who've got your back, other writers, especially horror writers, are really, really great people. So many of them are friendly, funny. They care a lot.
Absolutely.
So I remember seeing a tweet of that to that effect not too long ago, and I was like, wait, I think that you're right. I think there's truth to it. But I think it comes from us being outsiders. I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting, because it's almost like, in some ways, we can just feel like we're just a bunch of, like, a collection of broken toys that are discarded in an old dusty box. But at the same time, to find other people that like that as well. And it's like, all right, well, we've all got missing pieces, but together, it's like we can almost find those missing pieces with other people, or just knowing that it's okay to miss a few pieces here and there, because there's still the rest of us that is going to be of use to somebody else, if not ourselves.
Well said, Rick. That, to me, what you said just then, is exactly what the collection's about. It's all the missing pieces. It's all the people in the toy box. And I think that that's a celebration. You know what I mean? And I think that that's the optimism and the happy ending that I feel is kind of inherent in the between the lines in this collection. I think that's where that is. I think it's that. I think it's us saying, again, the removal of those masks, and say, look, I'm missing bits and pieces, but we're all missing bits and pieces, and we are perfect in our imperfection.
100%. Very well said. Aaron, I would love to ask, if I can, one last question here,
Of course.
before we wrap things up, before you collapse as well. You touched on it a bit earlier before, about some of the expansions of some of the stories in here, and breathing additional life into them. I know you touched on some potential filming of some of these, and you were kind enough as well to share something with me. Film adaptation of the Damage Inc. And holy crap, that thing hits home. Like, what a summarization of the story. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Are you gonna now? I should probably ask you when the rest of the world can see this, and I can maybe even talk a bit more openly about this brilliant thing that you gave me. And
totally. Well, look, I'll give the kind of pitch to people who are listening. So, Damage Inc. has been adapted into a short film called Becoming Emma Braintree, which has been adapted and was directed by an Australian filmmaker named Joshua Koski. Josh and I was very much involved in the creation of this thing, and it's been doing the circuit for about a year in terms of the festival run, and there's won a hugely unexpected amount of awards, and it has been seen by far more people than we probably ever anticipated it ever could be. No one is more surprised than me and Josh. It has been so warmly received. It also won awards at last year's Stokers in their film competition. It was entered in that particular competition.
Okay.
We won best screenplay. So that, and for it to be received by horror people so well, it was like mind-blowingly kind of affirming.
Yes.
I think if you like the movie, just wait until you read the book. Like it was one of those. it was one of those things that as soon as the kind of story started to kind of seep out there, there was interest straight away. It's really really hard to talk about what happens next.
Sure.
Ultimately, eventually, the film, as it currently is, will eventually be available to other people to see. We're holding off a little bit because it may not be the end of this thing. We These things aren't real till they're real, but we're certainly shopping it around for something feature length.
Yeah.
And obviously, and there's certainly interest on that front, based on the concept itself, the original story, and the strength of the short film. The short film adapts basically in a really really efficient way the first half of the novella.
Yeah.
There is a feature length version of this story that is written, that Josh and I have written, that expands and obviously encompasses the entire short story, but fleshes it out even further
Oh
in
wow.
ways
Okay.
that I find really exciting, that help us to nail down some of the conceptual stuff. And there are things in there that I'm really really proud of, and that I'm like, damn, why didn't I think of this when I was like I was develop? So, but that's what the adaptation process is like, and that's the great thing, that collaborating with others who are inspired by your work, that's the gift you get back from collaborating with other people, because there are elements that when I saw the film, I was inspired by how good it is as the creator of the original story, and it's an extremely faithful adaptation. But I was so impressed and charmed by it and by the effort. And I mean, I was there on set every day. This was a film that was made during COVID with incredible restrictions in place by young filmmakers who absolutely had everything to prove, and who knocked it out and made something that is as professional as you're going to get.
Yeah.
Um,
No, agreed.
and it's you know it's but I'm inspired by their efforts too, and so that inspiration is now something that is expanding into kind of new evolutions of this particular story. And that may not have necessarily happened if Josh and his team hadn't initially responded to it. So there's a relationship that forms through the process of adaptation and looking at your work through a different kind of media lens that is unexpected to even me as the person who made all this stuff up. So look, I would love to see Becoming Emma Braintree or Damage Inc., or however it is eventually titled, kind of up on the big screen.
Yeah.
But it's also, the short film has opened the door to opportunities for Josh and I to collaborate on a number of other things.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see like a Books of Blood sort of theme with, Clive Barker
Wouldn't
was
that
doing
be
the
great?
Seraphim films, or
Wouldn't that be great?
yeah.
But there's certainly the production company associated with the creation of that particular short film likes what I do and likes the way that I see the world, and are
Gotcha.
actively invested in working with me on looking at a lot of my projects. And the one that, and there is one that's not got anything to do with Cut to Care, that is an adaptation of my work that is
Okay.
as it's as very very close to being a reality as it's ever been, and it's exciting. But you don't want to say anything because you don't want to jinx it, because
Exactly.
the film industry is incredibly exciting, but it also is it runs on the edge of a razor, and it
Yeah,
can
you
go
gotta
up.
hope for the sake of hope, but don't hold your breath.
That's right. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not real till it's real, but it's
Yeah.
exciting, super duper exciting. I'll tell you offline what we've got in the pipeline.
Please do, yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for this, Aaron. I know we ran a little bit late as well. Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for getting the word out there about the book. Thank you very much for caring. That's what it really boils down to.